You're listening to the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.
As we cross over from the third to the fourth chapter of the Mishnah of Ketubot, we're crossing over a bridge. The third chapter essentially dealt with penalties for seduction and rape. And we've worked through all those cases. The fourth chapter deals with the economic relationships between initially a woman and her father, and then a woman and her husband. So in other words, the fourth chapter explores how the economic status of a woman in the time of the Mishnah shifts from being in the domain of her father or to being in the domain of her husband, and with certain intermediate stages, which we'll have a look at. So in other words, the fourth chapter is an economic chapter. But as we've seen so many times before in the Mishnah, the subject matter is linked. It's linked from Mishnah to Mishnah, from topic to topic. So the first economic relationship, which we're going to address in the fourth chapter, the first relationship we're going to address is the question of the fines for seduction and rape, and for that matter, the damages that were discussed in the third chapter. So in other words, we're going to go back to the seduction and rape of the third chapter, but we're just going to focus on the question of who gets the money, because we need to figure out in whose domain the woman resides. So that's how the fourth chapter begins, and we'll see it play out then in many other situations which have nothing to do with seduction and rape at all. Na'ara she nitpasta. So a woman was seduced, a na'ara, that's a young woman between 12 and 12 and a half years. Bashka ufkama uksana shel aviha. So her embarrassment and her blemish and her fine belong to her father. And when they say her embarrassment, they mean the damage is due for embarrassment and blemish. And the fine belonged to her father. Vehatzar. And in the case of rape, there are also damages for pain. And they too belong to her father. Vehatzar bat husa. And the damages for pain in the case of rape. So in other words, 12-and-a-half-year-old girl is in the economic domain of her father. All of these damages, even though they relate to her, they're paid to her father. So the girl's case was tried before her father died. They are her father's. If her father died, then they are her brothers. So if her father died, she has a status of an orphan. And in some situations, we've already learned, if, for example, she's raped while an orphan, then she gets the fine and the damages. But in this case, her father was alive when the court case came to court. So it seems that, and he dies. Well, if a man dies, his possessions go to his sons. They can be taken to support his daughters, and we'll learn later in the Mishnah. But even though the possessions go to his sons, actually they are docked. There's a first lien over the possessions for the support of his daughters. So the daughters have to be supported, but the boys get the inheritance. So in this case, the fine or the damages are due to the father. He dies. They go to the brothers, i.e., they go to his sons. Meita av harehen shalachim. Lo hispika la'amod badin ad shemeita av. If the case didn't come to court until the father died, so in this case, the sum is never due to the father. He dies before it comes to court. Harehen shelatzma. They are hers. In other words, once her father dies, any further economic activity that happens, including a case coming to court, results in economic benefit to her herself. Amda vadin ad shelo The case was tried before she reached the age of majority. In other words, before she got to over 12 and a half. Hare hen shelav. So the assets belong to her father. We've learned this already. We're not surprised. Meta av hare hen shelachin. If her father died, they are her brothers. The brothers inherit. Not surprising. Lo hispika la'amod badin ad shebagra hare hen shel atzma. If she became of majority age, this is an identical situation to the one where her father died. So if her father died, she gets the asset. If she became of majority age before the case was tried, she gets the assets. Hare hen shel atzma. In other words, either if she dies or if she becomes a majority, she gets the asset. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says if her father died before she could collect, they belong to her. So Rabbi Shimon is saying, look, in terms of the father's inheritance, what counts is not the date when the fines became due, it's the date when the fine was collected. Essentially, Rabbi Shimon is saying, and by the way, the halacha does not go according to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is saying, look, a debt is not an asset that you can pass down to your heirs. The only asset you can pass down to your heirs is a real, if you like, the real cash sum, the on balance, the real cash sum, the physical asset. So Rabbi Shimon is saying, look, if the assets weren't collected, they go to her, and the halacha doesn't go according to Rabbi Shimon. In fact, the sage is called the anonymous voice in the Mishnah contradicts. Her handiwork at anything she finds. Afal pi shelo gavat umeita av arehen shel achin. Her handiwork in anything she finds, even if she hadn't collected them. In other words, all of her kind of off-balance sheet assets, anything due to her that became due to her before she became of age, Umeita Av, and her father died, Harehen Shelachin, belonged to her brothers. So we do believe that a debt can be inherited. And what if he gave her in marriage and that she left his domain because of the wedding? So you can see now we're sliding from rape and seduction into the core questions of Ketubot. In other words, the economic status of a married woman. Hamareset bito v'gersha ersa v'nitalma ktubata shelo. A man betrothed his daughter, and then she got divorced. You can be divorced from kiddushin. You just need to get ersav and italma, or maybe he betrothed her and she got widowed. Now, in either case, if you are divorced with a get, or if you're widowed, you still get the money of her ketubah. You get your ketubah, and the Mishnah rules ketubata shelo. Her ketubah belongs to him because she's still in his economic domain. He siya v'gersha. He gave her in marriage, and she was divorced. He siya v'nitalma. He gave her in marriage, and she was widowed. Ketubata shela. If she was married and then divorced, or married and then widowed, her ketubah belongs to her. So the Mishnah is defining, actually, the marriage rather than the betrothal. Nowadays, we do betrothal and marriage to do it at the same time. We do kiddushin and nisuin under the chuppah. They're instantaneous. But in ancient times, kiddushin would have been a few months before nisuin. Betrothal would have been a few months before marriage to get the groom time to assemble the necessary economic requisites. So the Mishnah is saying, look, at that point, the if you like, in those times, the time at which a woman passes out of the economic domain of her husband into that of out of the economic domain of her father to that of her husband is the time of the marriage, not the time of the betrothal. And Rabbi Yehuda will disagree. We're not going to go like Rabbi Yehuda, but we should look at his opinion. The Mishnah preserves minority opinions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Harishona shel ha'av. In other words, the first belongs to her father. In other words, he married her off and she got divorced. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that ketubah belongs to her father. And I think Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning is that when he gave her in marriage the first time, so let's go back. Hisiya b'gersha, hisiya v'nit almana. So he gave her in marriage and she was divorced. He gave her, this is subsequently, he gave her in marriage and she was widowed. So she gets married twice, this woman. Her ketubah belongs to her. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, the first ketubah, the ketubah that was written before she got married, because the ketubah is written before nisuin. It's given to her when she's married, but it's written before she's married. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, look, the economic contract in that ketubah was written before she was married. So the ketubah belongs to her father. And the sages are not going to go with it, just like they're not going to go with Rabbi Shimon. These two Mishnayot are parallel. Amrullah, they said to him, Im Misha hisiya ein laviha bar rushut. They said to him, as soon as he gives her in marriage, her father has no, well, I've translated this as authority. Ein laviha bar rushut. He said, well, yeah, he doesn't have any authority over her. He doesn't really have any economic domain over her. That's really what the Mishnah is saying. And the halakha goes according to the sages.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.